This is the inside of the headlight shell on a 1983 R100RS. As you can see, there's an awful lot of wires in here because this is the central connection point for wiring on the bike. But to give you a quick orientation, in the very back is a board with terminals, and a lot of the wires connect to terminals on that board. There's also the turn signal relay that plugs into a connector, the headlight relay, and then right here is the connector for the headlight itself. Now, the main wiring harness comes in at the bottom and then runs around the edge of the shell and then goes all the way to the back. And what happens is a number of the wires go to the left and to the right, and they're grouped together because they're typically going to go to terminals that are on the left side of the wiring board or the right side of the wiring board. Now, other things come into the shell. For example, this is the right side handlebar connector, and then the left side connector also comes in through holes in the top. And then this is the set of wires that go to the ignition switch. So all of that comes into the shell as well. So it makes it look kind of busy and a little bit confusing, but I'll show you a method to the madness. Inside the headlight shell is a board that acts as a wiring block. And this is a spare one that I have. But this is how a lot of the wiring inside the headlight shell is connected together. They all connect onto this board. Now, when you look at the board, you'll notice that sections of it have color codes for the terminals inside their section. And you'll also see a number like 15 in the green-black section or a 58 in the gray-black section. Now, all the wires have a color code that'll match the section, so it's pretty easy to get the right wire in the right section. And the numbers are used on wiring diagrams to show where wires connect on a component, and all green-black wires will connect to a terminal 15, and all the gray-black wires will connect to a terminal 58. So those sorts of things make it easier to understand the wiring. Now, on the board are two fuses. One's between the green and the green-black, and the other's between the gray and the gray-black. So anything connected on this side is fused, meaning if this fuse fails, no power can get to anything on this side. And the same is true here with the gray-black terminals. Now, that means this will take power to various components, and so will this. So various things do end up being fused, even though they might not have a green-black or a gray-black wire connected to them. The other things that's on the board here is a set of terminals called reserve. And you can connect two wires to that and they'll be connected together. So you have some spare terminals if you need them. Now, when we flip the board over, you'll notice on the back a metal bus that connects each section. And that bus connects all the terminals, for example, that are in the green-black section together. So that means you can plug any green-black wire onto any one of these spades, and it doesn't matter because all of them are connected together. So that also makes it easy to connect wires inside the headlight shell. Now, there's two other sections that have some special capabilities. The brown-black wires in the LKK section and the brown-yellow wires in the 85B section. When we flip the board over, you'll see they're connected together with a diode. And a diode is a component which only lets current flow in one direction. And the way this diode is connected, it lets current coming in on 85B terminals flow to the LKK terminals. But if current tries to come in on the LKK terminals, it's going to be blocked by the diode and it can't flow to the 85B terminals. So that's the design of the wiring connector board inside the headlight shell. So I'm going to start by removing the sub-harness that goes to the ignition switch. And so I'm using a screwdriver just to push the grommet back inside the headlight shell. There, like that. And then I can slide the wires back inside the shell, like this. Now when I get to this end, I'm just going to push one of these through at a time. And there's just enough room that they'll slide. So you have to kind of bend the wire a little bit. And then be a little bit forceful. And that one's through. And it gets a little easier with the next one because there's a little less wire in the hole. So you can slide that one into the shell. And I just continue like that until I get all of them in. So here's the little sub-harness that goes to the ignition switch, and it came through that hole in the back. So that's all removed and inside the headlight shell now. So there are some details inside the headlight shell that I want to show you. One of them is that two of the green wires actually connect together. They don't use the plug-ins on the board. And also, there's two wires here that are green and blue, and they plug into each other. Now, I pulled the light relay off the side, and it goes on with a Phillips screw and goes through this hole. Makes it a lot easier to see the wires down here on this side of the board. The other thing that you need to note is that this is a ground wire, part of the main wiring harness, and it's two wires crimped together, but the other wire is going to go over into the base of the turn signal relay, so it plugs in here. So you have to snap this spade female connector out and get the wire out. Now to get to it, it requires you to remove the turn signal relay out of the socket, and then there's a screw that goes through the tab in the socket and goes into this hole here. But you can't see that screw until you pull the turn signal relay out of the socket. To remove the female spade terminal from the socket, I use a very small blade flat screwdriver. And if you look here in the socket, you'll see there's a small slot right here. And if you just stick the screwdriver into that and then pull it out, you can slide the spade terminal out. And if you look here, you'll see there's a little tab, and what I've done is compress that tab so that the spade can slide out. So now I can remove that ground wire that was over here, and when I put the new harness in, I'll put the new spade into this slot. Now I have removed that brown wire, and I put a piece of tape on this side of the socket for brown, because there's also the green black wire that has to come out. It goes in the terminal on the other side, so I labeled that green black. So I'll take that terminal out the same way I did the brown one with the little tiny screwdriver. Now there's another method to be sure you get the wires in the right holes when you reinstall them. And two things to note here. This is the relay that plugs into the socket, but the relay cannot go in backwards or sideways. It can only go one way. Okay? Secondly, when you look at the base of the relay, there are 3 pins, and this is the pin that sticks into this hole, which is where the green-yellow wire is. So the green-yellow wire, when you flip this upside down, is at the top, which lines up with this pin. So you have a wire on this side and this side. Now if you look at the base, you'll see here, I think, if I have a good enough light, that this pin is labeled 31, and 31 is a ground wire. So this is going to be the pin that gets the brown wire. Now the confusion here is that this pin is labeled 49. However, that gets the green-black wire, but green-black wires typically go to pin 15, except in this case. So in this case, if you look at your wiring diagram, you'll see that the turn signal relay, pin 49, has the green-black wire. So if you forgot to label your connector when you took those wires out, you can use what I just showed you as a means of being sure you get the right wire in the right hole. So the harness is held into the edge of the shell with some little metal clips here, and there's another one way back there. So I just use a pair of needle nose to bend the tab out a little bit, and then I can remove the harness and I have more free play to get wires in and out of the headlight shell. So at this point I'm just going to start removing the wires, but I want to do it in an organized way. You'll see that the main harness splits the wires to a set that go to the left and a set that go to the right. And in general, the ones that go to the left are going to be for terminals on the left side of the connector wiring board, and similarly the ones that go to the right will be on the right side. I've made up a template that looks like the board, and I'm going to note where I pull each of these off, and that'll help me be sure I get the new wiring harness wires in the correct location. I also find that it's good to use a set of needle nose pliers to pull the wire up off the terminal on the board. They're often pretty tight. Now, as I took the wires off, I used a spreadsheet that I created that looks like the wiring connector board. And I have a code here which identifies sources of wires, like MH is the main harness, LS is the left switch, etc. And then these are the color-coded numbered sections of the connector board. This is the middle of the connector board, and then this is the right side. So as I took the wires off and I did an inventory of what was on each of the sections, I put a code in. So for example, here in section 85 with the blue-yellow wires, the second pin is the main harness, and the top pin is the right side switch. Now, in this case, I put in a -2 to indicate that this connection actually had 2 wires, as does this one. So what I'm doing is creating a map as I pulled the wires off the connector block that I can use when I put the new wiring harness in. I really just need to focus on all the main harness wires and get all of those in on the pins. And I'll do the same when I put the wires in for the right side. So I pulled all the wires off the left side of the connector board, and these are all the ones that are going to go in that left side branch. And as I took them off, I wrote them down on a list, so when I put the new harness in, I can segregate these same wires over on the left side and leave the rest to go to the right side. So that'll make it a little easier to install the new harness. So I've removed all the main harness wires from the right side, and a number of them connected to terminals on the headlight relay. Now, if you remember, the relay mounts to the side of the bucket like this, and there's one wire left on it, which is the yellow wire, and that's on the front terminal. Now, the back of the relay is labeled for each of the pins. This one was labeled 30, and that's where the red wire went. This one's labeled 87B, and that's where the gray wire went. This one is labeled number 86, and that was the green-white wire. And this one is labeled 85, so that was where the black wire went. Now, this is all of the wires in the main harness that fit into the headlight shell, and they're all disconnected, so all I have to do now is remove the grommet here and slide the harness out. So I used a screwdriver to push the grommet out, and then I removed the wires one at a time. So that goes pretty easily, but you just kind of have to slide out each wire and its connector through the hole until you get them all out of there, and then you'll be ready to install the new wiring harness. And there I go. I've got the harness out of the headlight shell. This is the new main wiring harness I got from Euromoto Electrics for a 1983 R100RS or RT. Now, all of these are the wires that go inside the headlight shell, and most of them go to the connector block. So that's essentially the focus of installing the harness, is getting all of these into the right connection inside the headlight shell. But I thought I'd show some of the other connectors on this harness. This one is the connector to the fairing sub-harness, and this one is the connector that goes into the back of the instrument cluster. And then moving down, this white connector has the blue generator wire and a black wire that goes to the voltage regulator. This connector is for the front brake light switch, and this connector is to the clutch switch. Now, moving down further, this is the socket for the starter relay, and this is the plug that goes to the ignition control unit, contains those wires, and then the longer two here are for the horns. Now, back here, this is a set of 4 wires that come out near the coil bracket. This is the frame ground. This is the power to the coils. This is the trigger to the coils. And this is the rear brake light switch wire. Now, this plug goes to the rear sub-harness, so it contains the turn signals and the brake light and the running light. And this plug contains the wires that go to the neutral switch and the oil pressure switch. So I'm ready to start getting the wires inside the headlight shell. And this set here are the wires that go to the ignition switch, and they're actually the longest wires in the bundle. So I'm going to put those in first and actually run them all the way through into the hole in the back of the shell, which is back here. So I just will get them out of the way. And then I'll follow that with all of the other wires, starting with the longest ones and working my way to the shortest. The other thing I want to do is slide the grommet back down the wire, because there's a fair amount of it that runs inside the shell like this. So I've approximated about how far down I need the grommet, and that'll make it easy to get everything in the right place. So I have the ignition wire bundle actually poked through the hole now, and these are the terminals on the end that plug into the ignition switch. And I've also pulled in the other wires that are all part of that. So they're all inside now. And from here I just keep stuffing the rest of the wires on into the shell. So I have all the wires through the hole at the bottom, all up here. And what I'm going to do now is I am going to break them into the left and right side groups of wires before I attach the cable to the tabs inside the headlight shell. So now's the time to sort of sort these out and try to reduce the amount of tension on the wires in each group. It should make it easier to install everything onto the connector board. When I removed the old wire harness, I made a spreadsheet of what wires were in the left side and what wires were in the right side. And it pretty much corresponds to the color codes that are on the left side and right side of the connector block. But I thought this might make it a little easier to separate the wires and get them to go in the right bundles. So I have the wires separated into the left and right bundles, and I used a little Velcro tie wrap to just hold them together. And then if I want, I can undo the wrap and, trade a wire from one side to the other if I decide I want to make that change, but I think I've got them where they need to be. To prevent corrosion and oxidation on the terminals, I'm putting a little of this No-Ox IDA special on them. It's conductive, which is better than dielectric grease, and it should prevent corrosion, so I think that's a good idea. So I've installed the wires that go on the left side of the board, including the connection that was the two green wires that are off the board and the green-blue wire. These two are also off the board. It takes a little patience to put the wires in because I wanted to not put too much tension on any of them, and I didn't want to end up with a big rat's nest. So sometimes after I put in a connector, I had to remove it and reroute some wires just to make it a little more sanitary and straightforward. To simplify the wiring, I went ahead and wired up the light relay. So that got a bunch of the lines out of the way. Makes it a little easier to put the rest of them into the shell. Now on the turn signal relay, I marked which side had the brown and which side had the green-black wires. And I've got these here now. Now these are spade terminals that have a little tab on one side, and the tabs will go to the outside of the connector. So just to be careful, that says BR, which is brown. That's the brown wire. and you just push it in and it'll latch. And this says green black, and that is a green black wire. Tabs on the outside, slide it in and it'll latch. So I've got that all done. I can just take the tape off, and then I can mount the socket on the side of the headlight shell as soon as I get the tape off. And that goes in to a screw hole on this bracket, and it's the lower hole that the screw goes into. So this is the headlight shell with all of the wiring in it, and this is the right side switch that I lengthened so that it's now long enough to fit on the RT handlebars. So everything here is ready to install in the bike.